impressive second career as a sort of stunt double for Middle Eastern villains. Recall that back in 1956, to justify the reckless Anglo-French-Israeli assault on Egypt, Prime Minister Anthony Eden had fingered Colonel Nasser as another Hitler. Just a few months ago, Lindsey Graham, the reflexively hawkish Republican senator from South Carolina, likened Libya's Muammar Gaddafi to the Nazi leader, and more recently still, the journalist Max Boot, who has made a career out of promoting wars, discovered Hitler's spirit lurking in present-day Iran. However absurd such comparisons, the Nazi dictator's periodic guest appearances make an important point. They illustrate the persistent Western disinclination to see the struggle for the greater Middle East on its own terms. Instead, to explain developments there, Western leaders import cliches or stock figures ripped from the more familiar and, from their perspective, more reassuring short 20th century. And in doing so, they confuse themselves, and they confuse us. Alas, the elder Bush's effort to eliminate his Hitler came up short. Celebrated in his day as a great victory, Operation Desert Storm turned out to be anything but that. The First Persian Gulf War deserves to be remembered chiefly as a source of wildly inflated and pernicious illusions. More than any other event, this brief conflict persuaded Washington, now freed of constraints imposed by the Cold War, that the application of U.S. military power held the key to reordering the greater Middle East in ways likely to serve American interests. Here it seemed, in Desert Storm, here it seemed, was evidence that war still worked, and worked handsomely indeed. Flexing U.S. military muscle on the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific had once made America stronger and the world a better place. Why not count on American power to achieve similar results in the Persian Gulf and Central Asia? Take the mean that it seemingly brought the short 20th century to such a happy conclusion and apply them to the problems of the greater Middle East. Throughout the 1990s, neoconservatives and other jingoists vigorously promoted this view. And after 9/11, George W. Bush made it his own. So in explaining what had happened on September 11th, 2001, and what needed to happen next, President Bush appropriated precepts from the short 20th century. It was going to be World War II and the Cold War all over again. We have seen their kind, the president said of the terrorists who had assaulted America. The occasion was an address before a joint session of Congress barely more than a week after the attack on the World Trade Center. They're the heirs of the murderous ideologies of the 20th century, he continued. By sacrificing human life to serve their radical visions, by abandoning every value except the will to power, they follow in the path of fascism, Nazism, and totalitarianism. And they will follow that path all the way to where it ends in history's unmarked grave of discarded lies. Lest there be any doubt of where Bush was situating himself and us historically, he made a point of welcoming the British Prime Minister to the proceedings. America has no truer friend than Great Britain, the president declared, adding that once again, we are joined together in a great cause. The implication was clear. The partnership of Tony and George revived the tradition of Winston and Franklin and of Maggie and Ron. Good, once again, stood firm against evil. From his vantage point in the great beyond, Churchill must have lit a cigar, poured himself a brandy. Imagine his gratitude to President President Bush for overlooking the role that he and his countrymen had played in bollocksing up the greater Middle East in the first place. Because in reality, during the long 20th century, the United States had only intermittently viewed Great Britain as a friend. Perfidious Albion had instead been a recurring source of rapacious tomfoolery, making a mess of things, and then walking away once staying on had become inconvenient. The former British mandate for Palestine offers one example of Great Britain's contributions to the long 20th century. Kashmir, the nexus of an intractable dispute between India and Pakistan, offers a second. Even so, many gullible, or perhaps cynical, observers endorsed President Bush's interpretation. September 2001 became December 1941 all over again. Once again, World War II, unwelcome or inconvenient details excluded as always, was pressed into service as a moral memory palace. As the bellicose authors of a great agitprop classic published in 2004 put it, quote, "There is no way for Americans, it is victory or Holocaust." And so a new crusade, preposterously dubbed World War IV in some quarters, commenced. Well, we gather here more than a decade later. Although President Bush is gone, the war he declared continues. Once commonly referred to as a global war on terror, World War IV, and everybody caught on, today we hardly know what to call the enterprise. Bush's attempt to graft the putative rationale for war during the short 20th century onto the new wars of the greater Middle East didn't take. His freedom agenda withered and died. Even so, with Bush's successor closing down some fronts, ratcheting up others, and opening up new ones in places like Pakistan and Yemen, the conflict itself persists. It's become the Long War, a collection of nominally related overseas contingency operations defined chiefly by their duration. Once begun, campaigns continue all but indefinitely. What then of the American conviction drawn from the remembered experience of the short 20th century that war works? What evidence exists to suggest that this proposition retains any validity? Others may differ, but I see little to indicate that our affinity for war is making our country more powerful or more prosperous. If anything, a plethora of socioeconomic indicators suggest that just the reverse is true. Whatever the United States is experiencing today, it's not a reprise of World War II. News magazines may enthuse over today's Iraq and Afghanistan veterans as our new greatest generation, but they overlook a rather large distinction. In contrast to the opportunities that awaited the previous greatest generation when its members came home from war, the wars fought by today's veterans point toward a bleaker rather than a brighter future. History, the version that privileges the short 20th century above all other possibilities, makes it difficult to grasp the quandary in which we find ourselves as a consequence of our penchant for using force. After all, that account instructs us that war works, or at least ought to if we simply try hard enough. Yet it's just possible that a more expansive and less self-congratulatory accounting of the recent past, one that treats the long 20th century with the respect it deserves, could potentially provide a way out. To put it another way, we need to kick down the doors of the moral memory palace. We need to let in some fresh air. I'm not thereby suggesting that the canonical lessons of the short 20th century have lost all relevance. Far from it. Yet it's past time to restock our storehouse of policy-relevant parables. This means, according to the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Hussein-McMahon correspondence, to FDR's tete-a-tete with King Ibn Saud, and to the assassination of Count Bernadotte, to the Anglo-American conspiracy to depose Mohammad Mossadegh, and to the bizarre Suez Crisis, to the Iran-Contra affair, and yes, to Operation Iraqi Freedom, pedagogical weight equal to that habitually accorded to Munich, Pearl Harbor, and Auschwitz. We could do a bit less of the Churchill who stood defiantly alone against Hitler. We might permit a bit more of the Churchill who's seeking ways after World War I to police the Middle East on the cheap, push for the development of bombs loaded with mustard gas as a way to, quote, inflict punishment on recalcitrant natives. Implicit in the standard American account of the short 20th century is the conviction that war is purposeful, with the vigorous deployment of U.S. power the best way to hasten history to its intended destination. A sober appreciation of the surprises, miscalculations, and disappointments permeating the long 20th century, beginning with Great Britain's cavalier decision to dismember the Ottoman Empire, and running all the way to George W. Bush's ill-fated attempt to transform the greater Middle East, should temper any such expectations. What the long 20th century teaches, above all, is humility. Ideas are not mirrors. They are weapons. The words are George Santayana's, written back when the 20th century was young. Their function, he continued, is to prepare us to meet events as future experience may unroll them. Those ideas that disappoint us are false ideas. Those to which events are true themselves. Well, the ideas, assumptions, and expectations embedded in the received account of the short 20th century may not be entirely false, but they are supremely inadequate to the present. As historians, our obligation to the students who pass through our classrooms includes this one, to provide them with a usable past, preparing them as best we can to meet events as they unfold. Measured by that standard, military historians are falling short. William Faulkner famously said of the past, "It's not dead, it's not even past." As a general proposition, there's something to be said for that view. Not in this case, however. The past that Americans know is worse than dead. It's become a cause of self-inflicted wounds. As historians, we need to do better, and the means to do so are readily at hand. Thank you.